but it's going to get there. There we go. So now we're recording. Fantastic. So this is session 3, all about playtesting. If you're watching us live, hello. If you're going to join us halfway through and catch up later, hello as well. If you've been to the previous sessions and you've watched them already, then hopefully you'll forgive me if I do a very quick recap of what we've talked about previously. This light's bugging me. Sorry. I just apologize to people before the recording. My light is not working, or rather the one that I would like to have is not here at all. So I've got different lights. So I don't look quite as crisp this week, but hey. So yeah, welcome back to Game Design Online. I'm really enjoying getting back to these seminars. It was a really fun part of my 2020, and it's nice to be doing it again in 2022. If you were here last time, I'd be really curious to know how different this one is. Like, are there things that you like better this time around, things that you prefer better last time? Let me know. Feedback is always important. So yeah, I'll do a couple of quick recaps because there's a few things that will be pertinent this week, and I want to make sure that they're fresh in your mind. Also, I like the idea of people being able to dip in and out of these videos as they like, and not have to watch them all in order. So first of all, we talk about the NudiCat Games design process, which is kind of what this course is all about. When we design games, we have a 6-stage process. We start with the kickoff, where we kind of decide the scope of the project. We then start doing a whole load of research, looking at all sorts of different things to do with that game or that project in particular, whether it's going to be playing other games like it, taking on lots of different media, reading books, watching films, playing other games, video games, watching sports, whatever it might be. Then we get to make a test build, which we talked about last week in session 2, which is where you kind of get the barest bones of your game onto the table. And we talked a little bit about how the research and test build can kind of cross over quite a lot, and sometimes you just have to get it to the table quickly, and that's a good thing to do. Once you've kind of gone through your test build, you will end up with what's called a vertical slice, which is like a little chunk of gameplay, like a single round of play or something similar. Once you've got that, we come on to the mechanical build, where we stretch it out and get the start, middle, and end of the game in place. We make it fully playable. After that comes the full build, where you add breadth and depth, and you add lots of detail and replayability and all sorts of fun things like that. And then finally, handover and amends, which is got the tying up the project side of things. So yeah, in week 1, we talked about some of the basics, some myths to overcome, some general things like that. Last week, we talked about starting a project and getting that research done, finding inspiration, generating inspiration, and getting your ideas to the table. Today, we're going to talk about playtesting, which is a big one. It's a big topic. It's probably it's definitely more than an hour's worth of content, but I'm going to try to squeeze as much in as I possibly can. If I go quickly, you can always rewind later. Next week, we'll talk about a bit about rules writing. Week after that, we'll talk about adding structure to your rules writing and kind of refining it. And then finally, week 6, talk about what you can do once you've done all that and you've got a game. As ever, I don't think anyone here in the live chat hasn't been to these previously, but most importantly, there is no one true way to do this. You can learn this. You can, I say at the start of every talk, do it your own way. All I can tell you is what works for us and what has helped a lot of people that we've spoken to previously. If you have questions, pop them in the chat. Big ones we'll kind of save for the Discord chat afterwards. Come join us. We have a nice little hangout. 2 or 3 people usually. We'll have a little chat about things on Discord. And if you're joining us after the fact, if you're picking this up not live, if you're watching one of the recordings, you can still come chat to us on Discord. We won't be having necessarily a voice chat, but we are always open. That server is always live. I'm usually hanging around in there answering questions and just generally getting excited about games. So yeah, with all the preamble out of the way, it's only 5 past. That's good. Watching my time. We're talking about playtesting. What is playtesting, though? I think it's very easy when talking about game design to say the word playtesting without really thinking about what it means. And it would be remiss of me to go into this session particularly without really defining what I mean when I say playtesting, because it's a very, very specific thing. It says here it's a vital part of the game design process. I would argue it is the game design process that is the hardest part of it. Just writing a game down is kind of the easy bit. It's not. That's a horrible lie. It's not easy, but that's the easiest part of the process, really, a lot of the time. It's playtesting and refining and iterating that really is the hard work. You need to playtest early and playtest often. If you don't do that, your game will suffer massively. The longer you take before you playtest, the more it will hurt when you have to make big changes. And most importantly, at the end there, playtesting is not just the same as playing your game. It's not the same as demoing your game to people. Playtesting has a very specific purpose. So what is that purpose? As it says here, playtesting. The purpose of playtesting is to play a game with the primary intention of finding ways to improve it. That doesn't mean you're not going to have fun necessarily. It doesn't mean you can't invite some friends around and playtest, but it's not playtesting unless your primary reason for doing it, the primary thing you want to get out of it, is looking for ways to improve your game. You can playtest alone. You can lead others in a playtest. You can just pass your game over and let people do it. There are lots of different ways of doing it. I'm going to focus on those three specifically tonight. We've got like a 3-stage process that we talk about. But yeah, most vitally, it's not the same as playing a game, and it doesn't have to be a complete game. This is a huge issue that I see a lot of novice designers do, and even some experienced designers. They will insist on playing a game fully from start to finish during a playtest, which means they won't playtest until the game is ready for that. And it means they will often carry on playtesting after they've learned more than enough useful stuff to go and make changes. Because you reach a point where you're no longer getting useful information. So let's have a little look at the cycle of iteration. This is kind of, if you like, this is game design in a nutshell. As you can see there, we start by designing or creating a thing, and that could be your game as a whole. It could be an idea within your game. It works on many levels. You design it, you play test it, and you observe that during that play test. You make observations based on what comes out of it. And then you look back to the top and you iterate by designing or creating again. And you play test that and you observe and you go round and round and round and round. That's the cycle. As you can see, if you don't play test, if you spend all of your time designing, which is really, really common, especially in newer designers, they'll spend ages tapping away at their game, refining it and getting it as good as they can get it. Unless they can get to that playtest stage, they're not completing that cycle. They're not designing a game. They're just starting the design process. Without playtesting, as it says there, you can't see what works and what doesn't work. It's the only way to know. You can theorize, and the more experience you get, the better you get at theorizing, the better you get at anticipating issues. But until you playtest properly, you're not really going to get a good view of whether your game is working, and you will not progress through the game design process. So yeah, playtesting is absolutely vital. You can't do it enough. You can, but generally you can't. A good playtest session has a specific goal or an aim, a thing that you're trying to achieve with it. It ends once you've achieved that goal. You can literally say, thank you, that's great, we'll stop it there. We've learned all we need to know. Let's start again. Let's try it a different way. And finally, it gives you a clear direction. That's it. This is a good playtest session. Not every session will be like this. And a lot of the time, it's better to get a bad playtest session or a mediocre one than nothing at all, because you might still learn some things. But that's what a good one looks like. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you can put yourself in the best position to get the most out of your playtests and hopefully end everyone in a good position with a clear direction to go. The golden rule for playtesters, is that you must aim to get feedback from every single session. If you don't, really, you're wasting your time. We see a lot of people who playtest their games. They put them up on a tabletop simulator or something, or they make them available at a show or something, and they get people to play them. And they wait for emails to come in with feedback and ideas. If you're not actively seeking feedback, every session is going to be a bit of a waste, especially because there's feedback and there's feedback. There's the stuff your playtesters might tell you themselves actively, but there's a lot more that you can get by asking them questions. And we'll talk again a bit more about that towards the end of this seminar. So there you go. That is what playtesting is in a nutshell. Are there any questions on that before I go on? That's all pretty straightforward, really. I did instantly send out the PDF in advance if you want to read along and make notes in the margin. I'll do my very best to stick to the slides. I've Spoilers, exactly. That's always how I feel about this sort of thing. I don't want to see the slides that come up in advance, but I know they are very useful, so I've passed them out if people want to do that. Fantastic, very helpful. Good. Right, so let's talk about 3 levels of playtesting. I've kind of hinted at this already. Within our system of testing and designing, we use 3 levels of testing. And actually, we only started using this terminology quite recently. So this has actually changed since the last time we did game design online, because we used to call it solo testing. Solo testing, guided testing, and blind testing. We got rid of blind testing because there's been a shift in the industry away from using that term, because it has some connotations that are not helpful. And also solo implied that you have to do it by yourself, but you don't. So the 3 stages are closed testing, guided testing, and unguided testing. Each one of those will give you different things. You'll get different things out of it, and they each have their own limitations. They are all vitally useful at different stages. And what you will find is that you will cycle through them in the same way that you are cycling through that design, playtest, observe, iterate cycle. You will go through a similar thing of like, for each one of those, you'll go playtest it closed, playtest it guided, and maybe playtest it unguided, but that won't always be the case. At each level, what we're trying to do is answer a question, a specific question. The question will be quite broad in general, but you will turn that into a specific question for each session, which is when you determine what you're aiming for that session. And it says there level. We have 3 levels, and each level it reminds you that you progress through them in order. It's not really 3 types of testing; it's 3 levels. So you step up the hill each time you go. So let's talk about what these are. So closed testing. I didn't have any photos of me doing closed testing because it's generally quite a private affair. You're just sort of sitting there by yourself with a handful of components, a notepad, you're scribbling away. So I've got a stock image there of someone probably doing something that isn't game design, but it'll work for our purposes. The point is that you are there by yourself generally, or with a close design partner. So at this point, what you're trying to just determine is, does this idea you've got fundamentally function? And importantly, I say idea there because we can talk about playtesting individual ideas. We can talk about playtesting, whole games, but really a game is a collection of ideas. We talked about ideas quite a few times in this course so far, right? So at this stage, when you're closed testing, you're taking that idea or collection of ideas, whatever it might be. It could be that you're adding something new into a game. It could be that you're, starting the game from scratch. Does this fundamentally function? The kind of litmus test is to ask yourself, if I would put this in front of someone else and ask them to play it, will I be really embarrassed because it will stop working in 5 minutes and there'll be a really obvious thing that I haven't thought of? And that's why closed testing is important, because it's a safe environment for you to play around. It's like a sandbox, So you're testing by yourself or with a design partner or close or person that you trust. So it could be you've got a partner, you've got another designer that you know that you want to work with, but you're just trying your ideas out in that kind of safe environment. You are in full control. If you want to make changes halfway through, you can totally do that. You can change, you can decide, actually, I'm not going to use cards, I'm going to use dice, and just throw the cards aside, grab some dice and use those. You can completely change things. Litmus test. Litmus test is a term, it's a chemistry term, I think. I don't know. It's something to do with a testing the pH value of things, I think. As an idiom or a saying, it just means like just a good rule of thumb or a test that you use to determine a thing very quickly and easily. So yeah, kind of what I was saying there was like the rule is that before you move out of closed testing, you want to make sure that you're not going to embarrass yourself in front of other people, basically. So yeah, closed testing, you can do all this stuff nice and easily, but there are limitations, of course. You will have biases and blind spots. Even if you're working with one other person, they will have biases and blind spots. And there will be things that you will miss and you will not see because they're so obvious to you. You probably haven't even written them down. They're that obvious. Of course, we take turns going clockwise around the table. You won't learn anything about how other people approach the game at all. Whether that is they don't have your assumptions or they just have a whole different style of play that you won't have thought of. So closed testing has its limits. But once you're happy with what you've got, you can move on to guided testing. This is a shot of a game being tested where the designer is running it. It's actually from one of our game design courses in person a few years ago. The designer is showing it to a group of testers, showing them how to play it and getting their feedback. So the question here is, how do other people outside yourself engage with this idea you're presenting, whether it's, again, a whole new game, a collection of ideas, or a single idea by itself? You're also, the key thing is you're playing with people who they have a level of detachment from the game. They are not as invested as you are. So they can give you a more unbiased opinion. As it says, you lead the session, you explain the ideas, you teach the game. You're not kind of depending on them to do it themselves. And in the process of that, they'll play it and you will pick up all sorts of things you would have missed by yourself. And we'll talk a bit later about the sort of things you'd be looking out for in general. So guided testing is great. And guided testing, to be honest with you, is where I would say we spend 40 to 60% of playtesting time on a project, probably maybe a little bit more. I'd say we do, here we go, just to slap some random numbers on things, maybe 10, 15% on the closed testing, maybe 40 to 60% on guided, and the rest, he said, dodging some maths, on the unguided testing. Because really the guided testing is where you're finding out whether the game works. The unguided testing is where you're sort of seeing how your game communicates itself. So yeah, limits of guided testing though, you have to find other people. Compared to closed testing, you're having to go out there and find other people who are willing to test your game. And that is a whole challenge by itself. And honestly, at the moment, with the world being like it is and lots of things closed down in various places, that's become more difficult over the last couple of years, but also some great resources have sprung up. So in the email I send out, I will send you some links to some great online playtesting groups. But it's also worth looking up local playtesting groups in your area, speaking to other game designers, asking them to test your games. Game designers make great playtesters. But yeah, that's the first limitation. You have to find other people. Secondly, your game and components and things have to be at a certain standard. They don't have to be great, but in the closed test, it's just for you or someone you trust very closely. It can all be a bit rough. You know what everything's meant to be. You can use scraps of paper if you want to. You can't really do that in a guided test because you need to have other people. You need to get their opinion on how the game works. And if they're spending all their time trying to remember what everything is, that doesn't work as well. And similarly, you're less able to iterate and change your game at the table. Yeah, you can lean over and cross out a 4 and make it a 5 or something on a card, but you can do it 2 or 3 times before the players start getting a little bit narked because you're changing things and they can't because they're still trying to play a game, right? And you're shifting the goalposts as they play. So yeah, guided testing has its limits, definitely, but it's still very important as playtesting goes. Finally, we come to unguided testing. This is a session we had for a game which became Steel Coliseum. Before that, it was Robot Fight Club. Before that, it was Project Bash. Games have fun name changes sometimes. This is a game that we're putting on Kickstarter very soon, actually. And this is a session we had at the Dice Cup, which is a games cafe here in Nottingham. And basically, this was a late-stage test where I just gave everyone a set of components, a rule book, and stood back. What you're asking here is, does the idea, whether it's the full game, whether it's something that you've just put in and you want to try out, does the idea work without your input, without the designer being present? You are giving this now to a group of completely uninvested players, and they're by completely uninvested, what I mean is they not only don't know the game, they probably ideally they don't care about whether it's any good. They just want to give you feedback, and you're not going to be there, running it for them. So they'll feel less pressured to kind of do things the way you want them to. You are engaging as little as possible. Ideally, you would be completely invisible. I know game designers who use video recordings. They obviously get their testers' permission. My goodness, please get your testers' permission if you're going to record them. But they will completely not be in the room and just let them play the game. And you're observing how they interact. How do they pick the rule book up? How long does it take them to get to the point where they start to set the game up? How long does it take to set the game up? You're just trying to find out how they engage with the game and how well your game explains the ideas that you are introducing and testing. And yeah, unguided testing is, as a result, very specific in what it can give you. Limits for it, though, you need to find lots of different testers. You'll need to have lots of different ones, especially if, for example, you're playtesting your whole game and you're at the unguided stage, and what you want to do is put it in front of them and see how they react to it as a new player coming to it for the first time. Well, each group can only do that once. So you need to have a constant stream of new people trying your game out. This is where playtesting events and online groups can be really handy. Protospiel is a fantastic event that happens in various places around the world, and people just come along and playtest a whole load of games. There are always, or often, playtest tables or areas at expos and conventions. But yeah, unguided testing, that is a big challenge, is finding enough people to give your game a really solid unguided test. Your game needs to be polished in the same way that the guided test has a minimum standard. So does this one, and it's much higher because you have to be able to give the game to your players. And ideally, you don't want to be engaging at all. So you don't have to explain to them what diagram is going to be there one day or something. You want them to be able to see the diagram and use it. And as it says there, if you have to give any input in the test, you affect it. It's like any sort of scientific observation, right? If you interact with a subject, you're going to affect the outcome. As a result of that, you probably won't use unguided testing until you're quite a way into development. I would probably not use it until the full build stage of a game most of the time, because that's where we encourage you to start actually introducing well-written rules that teach your game. So you have this cycle, right? So you get a new idea in your game. You go into closed testing, where you test it yourself or with a trusted person. Once you're happy with that, you go into guided testing, where you lead a group through to observe how the game functions with other people involved in it. And then potentially you step away entirely and let a group play it through. How often do you repeat that? How many times do you go around that cycle is the question. There's no hard and fast answer, but you have to remember that returns always diminish. Here's a little graph for you. Perfection is a lie, but assume that 100% perfection, that is the perfect game. That's the perfect version of your game. You've designed a game, and it is better than it cannot be improved at all. You won't get there, but that's there. Your first iteration jumping to your second, you might actually have like a 30% improvement in how perfect your game is. I don't even like using the term perfect because it implies perfection is possible. But I can actually get a little pointer out here. Can you see the pointer? I think the pointer is now on the screen, I believe. I'm going to act as though it is. So yeah, you might find this jump here. Yeah, fantastic. So this jump, your first iteration, you changed loads. You realize that loads of stuff wasn't working. The initial iteration was really rubbish. But now you've got a whole load of stuff that actually kicked into place. And now after playing it once and testing it once and making some changes, it's looking great. Next time you do some more changes. And yeah, you're definitely seeing some improvements, but not quite as much. And again, and it gets less and less and less and less and less and less and less. So you will find that you hit a point where your iterations are making minuscule little changes. And you have to decide when enough is enough. And that's difficult. It's very difficult. And it is tempting to keep on going forever and ever and ever and attempt to attain perfection. But don't do it, because you will never finish your game. You just have to trust your gut and accept that the time has come to move on. Where that line is different for every person. A lot of the time for me, it's when the deadline is hit, or when the deadline hit about a fortnight ago, generally. That's when it's ready. And I'll do whatever I can to make it good before that point. But there comes a point at which you have to say, no, we are done. As with any creative endeavor, you can fiddle with it endlessly, but you'll definitely reach a point where you can fiddle no more and still get useful stuff out of it. Little footnote at the end of this. I want to put this in somewhere. I didn't quite know where to put it, so I'll put it here. Don't forget that if people are volunteering to test your game, they are doing you a favor. There is a fair chance they'll give you feedback that you disagree with. There's a fair chance they'll be rude. There's a fair chance they will say things in a really, critical manner that kind of hurts you because you've kind of put your creation out there. Whatever the case, you have to thank them for their time. And remember, they have volunteered to help you out. Treat them well. When we used to do large group playtests, we would often book out a room above a pub or something. That you can see it back in this slide. This is the Grosvenor pub in Nottingham. Yeah, they've got a function room. And we went up there, and I would get them drinks and bowls of chips and whatever else. Just a little thank you, you know. And obviously, everyone's budget varies, but whatever you can do to help your testers is great. So that's the end of that section. Any questions? We've got a couple of questions here. Renato's asked, once you're comfortable, which testing is better suited to balance for balance testing? Yeah, sorry, this is a really good question. So balance testing, you kind of want people who, okay, so you want a variety of different types of gamer to play your game. You want people of all different sorts to play your game, because what you want to find out in balance testing, what you're really looking for is you're looking to make sure that the game doesn't feel unfair. That's the main thing you're going for, right? So that each player, whatever it is they're doing, has an equal chance of success, or a relatively equal chance of success. It depends on the game. So in balance testing, you want people that are playing, that have got a wide variety of experience. You want people that are new, people that are old. If you want your game to have a thing where skilled players that have played it more have a much better chance of winning, then you need a variety of different skill levels, right? So you can identify that. Also, in balance testing, you want your game to be as finished as possible, because what you don't want to do is do a load of balancing and refinement, then make a fundamental change to a rule which will invalidate everything you've learned. You have to start all over again. So I would say closed testing is not good for balance testing because you need people other than yourself. Guided testing is good because you can, really closely brief your players and observe what they're doing. But if you're in every session, that puts a limit on how many games you can play. There's only so much time that you as a person can have. So really, for me, I tend to do most balance testing at the unguided stage. I will do some in guided, but it is a lot of it in the unguided stage. What it will often be, though, is it's not unguided where people are seeing it for the first time. It's more, I will have remote playtesters who I've taken them through the guided playtesting process, and now they are testing by themselves a game that they've played several times with me, and they will then report back any changes and balance tweaks and fixes, that sort of thing. So the answer to the question is mostly unguided, but start them off with some guided. Martin, credit playtesters from every level. I try to, certainly. I don't always achieve that, but I certainly try to. I'll talk later about getting playtester information, but I think it's worth asking your playtesters at every level, would you like to be credited? Now, if it's the case that your game changes an awful lot and the game that comes out at the end is nothing like the one that it was at the start, it might not be appropriate to credit a playtester who was there at the very start of it, because the game they tested wasn't appropriate. But maybe it's nice to still credit them in there, and when they say, hey, why is my name on this game, you can say, well, actually, that's the one you playtested 6 years ago. Eventually it became this, and you were there at the start. It's up to you. Depends on how much space you got in your rulebook, basically. Cool. So let's move on to the next section. What is the time? Half past. Doing good. Right. So let's see how we take all that lovely theory and apply it to the Needy Cat Games design process. We talked about the different stages we have. How do we use those different levels of testing in those different stages? So yeah, each stage of the design process, test build, mechanical build, full build, has different playtesting requirements. And obviously the different levels can come in different ways at each of those. We'll talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about how at different as you progress through the different stages, your changes will become less extreme. It's the way that if you were making a carving from a block of marble, you would start with your big hefty tools to chop away big chunks of it, and then you would go in with finer and finer tools as you go. You wouldn't start with the little teeny weeny, I don't know what people use to carve marble, a Dremel. You wouldn't go in with a Dremel. I believe Michelangelo used a Dremel on David. But whatever the case, you wouldn't go small. You start big, and then you gradually refine as you go. We talked previously, a chisel. Chisel is a much better word for it, isn't it? Chisel is probably exactly the thing that would have been used. And yeah, remember the ignorables. We talked about the ignorables in, I believe, session 1. We talked about things that you can ignore at each stage of the process. those are really important here because it's very easy to get derailed during testing. So you want to focus on what matters now in the moment. Let's just do a very quick recap. If I can find my mouse pointer, let me turn off the pointer that you can see because you don't want to see me waving it around the screen. 3 stages of design. So the test build is aiming to create a vertical slice of gameplay. Mechanical build is aiming to create a playable game with a start, middle, and end. And the full build is aiming to create that complete, finished, polished version of your game, like the final prototype, before it all gets laid out and made beautiful. In fact, here you go. Here you can see like this is a representation of how much time we kind of spend on each of those stages proportionately. So test build is generally quite small at the start. Mechanical build is you're working out the game engine. And then full build is polishing, tidying up, and making sure the game teaches itself. As you can see, that kind of maroon-colored line represents the magnitude and frequency of change. So yeah, there at the start is you with your sledgehammer, I suppose you might use at the start of a marble sculpting project. Probably not, though. To really block out the major shapes of your statue. And then as you progress through, you're making smaller changes and you're making them less frequently. We've talked earlier about how in the test build, you're in that kind of complete freeform, stage, and also in closed testing, we're in that early stage where you can do what you like. You can make changes quite freely. As you progress through, those changes become smaller. So yeah, it says here, at each stage of the project, you will put multiple levels of testing to use, and you will cycle between them. You will find there's a bias in the early stages of the project towards closed testing, because in the test build where all bets are off, you can do what you like, closed testing is kind of the most useful. And the final stages when you're polishing, balancing, refining, unguided testing would be most useful, as I kind of said a minute ago. So this is a cycle you will go through again and again and again. So what do we do at each of those stages? So test build. Let's look at how we would use each of those levels of testing in the test build. Some of you made a test build last week. I saw a couple of, I heard a chat on the Discord about one. I saw some pictures of another one. Hopefully some of you have maybe, made your test build already. If you haven't, that's fine. But whatever the case, while you've got that test build, here are some things that you will use the different levels of testing for. Closed testing at this stage is your sandbox. It is the place where there is a big safety net. No one else is sitting around needing to be entertained. No one's sitting around, judging your game. It's just you and maybe someone you trust. And you can try out your big, crazy ideas. I always recommend at the test build stage, use ideas that you know will never make it into the game. In the same way that high fashion shows or concept cars will use elements and designs and things that will never make it into the final, market piece. But by kind of pushing boundaries early on, you can explore new areas that you'll then boil down to something usable. And yeah, it absolutely applies here as well. You can make big changes during play. Nothing's off the table. It's all yours. So test build, closed testing is kind of where you're going to spend a lot of time. Then once you've got your kind of vertical slice put together, you're going to start bringing in other people and getting those additional perspectives through guided testing. You want to make sure you keep your tests short. Again, you want to stop as soon as you've learned the thing that you need to learn. Avoid sort of changing too much during play. Do as much changing as you can in the closed testing. Only, as I say, you'll get 2 or 3 decent changes before people start getting wound up. And yeah, design a get-together of an ideal forum. Things like, even like Discord channels. Our Discord server is a good place to find other designers, people on this course with you. Playtest each other's games. Give it a go if you can get things online in different places. Tabletop Simulator and the various things like it. There are lots of different things. Screen Top, Tabletop Playground, Vassal, all sorts of different ways of playing games online. And a lot of them are actually increasingly achievable to put your own things on there. And they're a good way to test your things out with other designers. As I said earlier, unguided testing doesn't really help you here because the point of the test build is that you're not writing much stuff down. You're not really putting things into polished forms that other people could interpret. So there's no real use in doing unguided testing in the test build. That's not to say it will never be useful. I'm sure there are weird edge cases where it would be, but generally not much help. In the mechanical build, you're still going to use that closed testing because closed testing now is your test bed. And what this means is whenever you make a change or an iteration to your core engine, your vertical slice has developed your core engine. Now you're going to kind of make it have a start, middle, and an end. whenever you put anything new in, now we're going to have a set of victory conditions. I'm going to try those out myself before I put them in front of anyone else. Doesn't mean I'm going to play a full game with them, but I'm going to see, do these feel achievable? How the game is set up, I will do it myself before I put it in front of anyone else, because I want to make sure that they're not going to waste their time coming to my playtest and we set up, and within 5 minutes I go, actually, I need to do more work on this. So closed testing is your test bed before you move into guided testing. You want to make your changes away from your testers and avoid making changes to that core engine if you can, because you've already settled it. Any changes you make will ripple outwards and change everything else. Guided testing, this is where you're going to be doing the majority of your testing in the mechanical build stage. You're going to be using this to refine your game engine, making sure it works under all different circumstances. You're testing full sessions from start to finish. You're trying to avoid making changes during play unless absolutely necessary, because really you want to make sure you've made those little changes and picked up those little weird mistakes during closed testing. And you're going to gather feedback and iterate mindfully. What I mean there is, during the test build, and even during closed testing of the mechanical build, you can make a little change quickly or something because it seems like, yeah, you got a gut feeling, well, I'll change that. But as you develop onwards through the mechanical build, each change should have more thought behind it. You should be waiting until you've seen adequate evidence of an issue before you change it. You want to avoid knee-jerking. And we'll see that more in the full build. But even here, it starts becoming important not to quickly knee-jerk. You shouldn't here have a playtester go, I think that the resources on that thing are, that thing gives out too generous resources. You shouldn't immediately say, cool, halve it, and we'll play the rest of the game like that. Don't do it here. Wait to the end of the game, have a discussion about it. Maybe wait and play another game and see how they feel then. So start iterating mindfully. And yeah, as it says there, unguided testing is probably overkill here, but it can be helpful if you struggle to stay objective during guided tests. So if you're finding yourself running guided tests, you've got people testing your mechanical build, and it could be a thing where you have you've taught them how to play, but you're still wanting to kind of get involved in it. You're struggling to kind of sit back and observe. You can give that group the game and say, off you go and test these new things. Here's a new set of updates. Go and let me know what you think. It takes you out of the equation, and it can just kind of help get good feedback on things without you having to be in the room and without you influencing their feedback at all. Then finally, when we come to the full build, closed testing is like it's a checkpoint or a checklist. It's where you, again, anything new that goes in, you test it yourself first. Now, really, the things that are kind of being added that are new should be very minimal at this stage. So it might be, for example, if you've got a game with multiple different scenarios or setups and things, you might introduce new scenarios or setups here, and it's worth you in closed testing just giving them a very quick sense check and running through before you unleash them on your testers. Because again, at this stage, you want to make sure it's good before you give it to someone else, right? You don't want them to waste their time playing it. Guided testing lets you kind of fine-tune and balance. We talked about balance earlier. You can give your group specific instructions. So you can say, for example, in this game, I really want to test these 3 factions. So can you make sure you each pick one of these? Or I want to see how the economic game plays out in this. Can you make sure you do that? In an RPG, I really want to test this character class. Can you make sure one of you is this character class? And next time we play, can you do it instead? I want to see how you take it differently. And I talked about iterating mindfully. Here, that is even more important. You're using that tiny chisel on your statue. You are being ever so careful before you make any changes, because every system in a game is intrinsically linked to other systems in your game. And whenever you change one, it will have effect on other systems. And the more refined, the more developed a game is, the more subtle you have to be, because you can make a tiny change to one thing, and without realizing it, you can completely screw the other half of your game somewhere else. I've done this many times. I speak from bitter experience. So yeah, you want to be really carefully gathering test feedback before you make changes. And similarly with unguided testing at this stage, this really tests your writing, your rules writing, your structure of your rule book, how everything's laid out. Because what you're testing is really how people approach your game without any direction from you at all. By this stage, you should be giving them, in the full build, something that is as close as possible to the final product that they can go and buy in a shop one day, or whatever, however it is you're distributing your game. So you want to see how they will approach that without you digging your oar in and telling them what to do. So this is testing how your game presents itself, how it teaches the rules. And here you're going to focus on things like the onboarding process. I hate that term, but it's really useful. Like how new players approach your game and get into playing it for the first time. You can check for snags, you can check for problem areas, things that are just rubbing, they're a little bit rough still, they're causing a little bit of friction, and you can start really smoothing those out at this point. But you're not even, as you go through, you're not even using the chisel, you're using sandpaper or a little like rough brush at this point. You will increasingly get more and more fine. But of course, don't forget, when you get to the end of that point where your refinements are getting increasingly small, be aware there comes a point where you have to stop. So yeah, finally, don't forget the ignorables. I find it really helpful to actually give playtesters a printout of the ignorables for the stage that I'm at. So if I'm doing a guided test, I'll say, look, here it is. We're not worrying about graphic design. We're not worrying about really like clear rules terminology. We're not worrying about all these things because that is stuff I haven't even put work into yet. I'm ignoring them as a designer. I'd like you to ignore them as playtesters. People will still point stuff out. I guarantee it. You will say to them, do not care about spelling and grammar at this stage. It doesn't matter. Someone will start saying, oh, you spelled a word wrong here. Because people like to help and point things out. When that happens, just note it down, say thank you, move on. Don't tell them off for giving you feedback. Don't discourage them because that's what you want them to do. Note it down, move on, forget about it. Fight the urge to test the cool stuff first. The same way with the ignorables, you have to fight the urge to write the cool stuff first. Here, fight the urge to test the cool stuff first. You might think that in your test build, you really want to try out loads of cool, different, unique model rules in a war game or something. Don't. Get your core engine done straight away, and then later on you can test out the cool stuff. That's your reward for doing the basics. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of putting that stuff into practice at the different stages. Any questions on that at all before we come into our final section? Good. Right, okay, let's look at effective playtesting. How do you get good at playtesting? Let's find out. If I find out, I'll let you know. I've got some theories. I'll share them with you. So, as I said at the start, an effective playtest should end with you having a clear direction for where you're going to go. You want to come out of that test session, ideally, thinking, okay, I know what I need to do when I sit down next to work on this game. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes you'll come out of a playtest session and you'll be very frustrated and you'll be sad because it hasn't gone well at all. But there are ways to build an effective session. And as it says there, it starts before the session begins and it ends after it. The actual playing the game is just one stage. And if you're finding that your playtest sessions aren't feeling effective, it's probably because you haven't done the stuff before or after the session as well as you could. Playtesting, giving feedback, receiving feedback as well, observing, all these are skills that you can develop and that your playtesters can develop. If you use the same testers again and again, so with a guided test, for example, even with an unguided test, you can have groups of people that you use regularly, and you can train them, you can coach them and develop their playtesting skills, and they'll get better at playtesting. You'll get better at using their playtests effectively, and eventually they'll probably blossom and bloom into full-fledged game designers themselves, and thank you for helping get started in their career. It happens, and when it happens, it's beautiful. So here is a list of possible outcomes for a playtest session. First of all, you need to go back to the drawing board. Everything you did here, everything you brought to this was rubbish. Whether it's the whole game or just the ideas you were testing out here, it's no good at all. Next up, one idea worked great. Everything else is awful. Next, the game is a mess, but there's a few little islands of excellence within it. There are a lot of snags, but overall the game's solid. You're in a great place. One or two things need tightening up. Or everything worked great and there is no work required. Fantastic. One of those is no use to me. One of them is the one that I don't want to see. Which one is it? I'm hoping you can all tell me. I'll let you shout at your screen, or someone can type something into the chat. I don't care. But it is the last one. Thank you. The last one is the one that you should be afraid of as a designer. And it's the one that I often hear newer designers being quite happy with. The number of times I've seen someone say, oh, I ran 100. That's a lot, isn't it? I ran 10 playtests over the weekend and none of them gave me any feedback. The game's doing great. That's a red flag, right? Because when's the last time you played any game, one you haven't designed and one that's published, and played it 10 times and didn't think of something you'd change and do differently, right? Especially if you're a game designer, you should have instincts that tell you you want to change things in games. You want to make them better and improvement and attain that impossible perfection, which will never be attained, and therefore there is always stuff to change. So if a playtest session finishes and there's no feedback, A, I don't believe it. B, if anything, it means that there are problems that exist, they just didn't come up in the test. Most importantly, though, it gives you no direction. This is useless to you as a designer, because you're coming out of it with no idea of what happens next, which way you need to go. So how do we avoid that? Here is James's list of 10 points for a successful playtest. In the middle there is the bit people usually think of. It's the obvious part. You play a game, you make notes. Cool. But we're going to start before that. First thing you're going to do before you even think about starting a playtest session is you're going to analyze the level of testing that you are using. So is this going to be a closed test? Is it going to be a guided test? Is it going to be an unguided test? If it's a closed test, should we have moved on already? Am I just polishing, testing it by myself because I'm scared to show it to someone else? Should I have already moved on? If it's a guided test, is it ready for it? Or should I do some more closed testing first? Or is it ready to be put into unguided testing? And so on. You need to analyze and make sure, just question yourself whether you're doing the right thing. Then you gather your testers and you prepare to play. So you get them into a place, you make sure that they are all prepared and ready. And this, to be fair, this is a stage people will generally do. It's quite hard to run a test session without doing this bit. The briefing, though, is a thing people don't always think of. The briefing is really important. The briefing is where you talk to your playtesters and you tell them what playtesting is. Yeah? You're then going to set your aim, focus, and endpoint. You're going to set the things that you're trying to achieve. Then you'll start the session. Make observations and take notes. 7 is really important. People often forget it. End the session once you've achieved your aim. If you're testing a 3-hour game and 40 minutes into it, you've learned enough to go and make some important changes that will affect the game in a big way, then the other 2 hours and 20 minutes are wasted. You might learn some stuff, but you're probably going to make some changes that will invalidate that anyway. You're going to debrief and discuss things with your testers. You're going to analyze your observations. You're going to create an action plan. All of that is stuff that you need to think about when you come to a playtest. It sounds like a lot, and it can be, but as you do it more, it gets easier. So let's look at some of these in more detail. How do we brief a playtester? The most important thing is to let them know what a playtest is. So you're learning here, and I say learning, some of you probably already know a lot of this, but you're getting a clear idea of what playtesting is. You're going to tell your playtesters exactly the same stuff. You're going to tell them that a playtest is all about trying to answer questions, specific questions about your game. You can tell them about different levels of playtesting. You can get them to understand that this is a particular session, that we're at this particular level. We're looking to find out these particular things, and this is what I want to get out of it at the end. Tell them that the game might not finish. You might get to a certain point and go, cool, yeah, that's enough. We've learned it there. Get them into the mindset they're not just playing a game. As it says there, manage their expectations. Don't let them think they're playing a finished game. Because if they come into a playtest, if you invite them to come play a game with you and they expect to play a finished, published game, they'll be disappointed when it looks nothing like a finished, published game. Make sure they know there will be snags and issues. They are here to hunt them out. That is their job. That's the thing they're volunteering to do is to help you find problems. So they shouldn't expect perfection. Make sure they know that you're going to be taking notes. You might ask them some questions. If you're planning on recording anything, video or audio recording can be useful. You can capture the table talk kind of thing. Get their permission, ask them if that's okay. and telling you might ask them to stay around after the session. What you don't want is you get to the point where someone's the game finishes and someone goes, "Cool, I've got to run because I've got a bus coming and I need to go now." Make sure they know that there'll be a period of time after the game's ended where you need to talk to them. So if they need to run for a bus, you end the game earlier so they can still do that. Encourage your testers to be honest and constructive. It's difficult. It's very difficult, especially if they're people that you know, or even if it's people that don't like being, too assertive or confrontational. They might not like the idea of being, critical of things you're doing because they might think it might offend you. You need to, nurture this idea that what you want is good feedback. And I try really hard for my playtesters. I don't always achieve it, but I try really hard to ask them as often as possible, what do you think of that? What would you change there? How would you do it differently? And whenever they give me a piece of feedback that something isn't working, I thank them really profusely because I want to encourage them to keep on giving me that feedback. That's why they're there. So that's how we do some briefing. As part of that briefing, you can set your aim and focus, but really you want to have thought about it already beforehand, before the testers turn up. So you want to set an aim that's appropriate for your test level. Look back at those test level slides I had earlier, and we have the different questions at each one. Does it fundamentally work? How will other people engage with it? Does it stand on its own? And then within that, think of it like a sub-question. So I want to find out if this new faction feels competitive within the current structure of the game. I want to see if this scenario I've written for this RPG I'm writing is achievable. I want to see if there's some cool plot hooks in this particular thing. Whatever it is, set your aim. And it can be really specific, it can be really broad. You can decide to look at just one individual part of a game or the whole thing. You might say, in this playtest, I just want to do this particular round of the game. I want to do the resource management, the round where we gain income. I just want to do that 5 times in a row and see how it feels and see if it can come out different ways. Or you can say, I'm going to play a whole game, whatever it is. Again, remember your ignorables. Don't set aims that are outside the remit of your current design stage. And make sure your playtesters know, as part of the briefing, what the aim and focus are. So they know what you're kind of pushing towards. Now, I will say caveat, you can, as it says there, if you want specific feedback on a certain element, you can tell them, but be careful not to influence their judgment. So, for example, don't say, right, I'm testing this thing. Can you have a look at how this particular character is at shooting? I don't know, whatever it might be. Don't say, I think this character is underpowered at shooting. Can you find out for me? Because that's giving them an inherent bias, right? If you want to focus on a particular thing, that's great. That's fine. That's valid. But don't color their judgments in advance. Be very clear. We will end the game when. Make sure that phrase comes up in your test. We will end the game when. And it could be, we will end the game when I think I've gathered enough information. That might be fine. Or we will end the game after 3 rounds. Or we will end the game at 9 o'clock. Because that's when people need to start leaving. So we need to have time to debrief after that. Whatever the case, you're getting everyone on the same page. So everyone knows what they're pushing towards. It's really important to record observations during a test. So never start a playtest without at least a pen and paper. I've seen game designers who sit down to playtest their game and they haven't got a notepad or anything. And I say, are you not keeping notes? And they'll say, oh, it's all right, I'll remember. And they won't. I guarantee they won't. I certainly couldn't, because there'll be all sorts of little bits of detail that come up that you will forget. So recording your observations is really important. You need to have some kind of tool. We all have phones now, as I've said previously. There are multiple apps, but I think just a notepad is really handy, because you want to be scrappy and quick, and you want to be able to come back to stuff later. You can use pre-made feedback forms, but always make sure that there's room for random notes and scribbles and drawings and whatever else. Record everything that occurs to you during play. Any thoughts you have, even if you think it's really obvious, if you don't write it down, you will forget it. Obviously, some people might have amazing memories, but write it all down, especially because of a stage we're going to come to in a little bit when we look at analyzing notes. try to avoid interrupting the flow of play. If you're teaching the game in an early guided test, it can be really helpful to have like a design partner or someone to take notes. If they're invested in the game, if they've been designing with you as a design partner, they can just sit and take notes. If not, you can get someone, you can say, hey, can you note down this, please? Can you write this down? Sophie and I, in Needy Cat Games, we often do this for each other. We'll sit and one of us will be taking notes while the other one is playing. And then we'll compare notes afterwards. Because, while it's still fresh in our mind, I'll make sure there's nothing I've thought of that didn't get written down or vice versa. As I said there, you can record your session. Doesn't replace note-taking. Note-taking is still really important. What you can do, though, is if you're filming a session and you're watching it at the same time, and you're maybe running a guided test, you can just write down timestamps. Keep a stopwatch, a clock or a stopwatch on the table in front of you so you can see what the time is, how long the video's been running for, and write down 14 minutes and 10 seconds. There was a discussion about this particular thing, which would be good to go back and replay. Or at 5 minutes, 2 seconds, the players got confused over this particular rule. So you can use recording that doesn't replace note-taking. Observe your players as they are playing your game. It's really, really easy to focus on the game itself, look down at the table and look at all the things that are happening there and not look at your players. And this is huge for me. For me, game design, a big part of it is about fashioning and, designing a player experience. Players are going to sit down and go through a whole load of stuff that you're throwing at them for a couple of hours. How are they reacting to that? So watch their emotion, watch their body language, watch it throughout the session and make notes accordingly. At this phase of the game, everyone started looking a bit bored and looking at their phones. At this phase in the game, everyone was talking and was excited and animated. You can start seeing that sort of thing. You want to watch how they are interacting with your written rules. If players are kind of squinting down at your cards, your text is probably too small. That's a big one. If they're having to kind of look at a thing and play it over their head a few times, it's probably not clear enough. If they're having to look things up in the rule book multiple times, maybe that rule isn't memorable enough. One of my favorite ones is if they keep getting a rule wrong, but everyone gets it wrong the same way, you probably should change it to that because what they're doing is probably better than what you've written. Are your players engaging with each other? What's the table talk like? There's no right answer for this, but depending on what your game is, if you want your game to be very interactive, are they interacting? If you want it to be a kind of a puzzle, heads down, look in, are they doing that? Where are they focusing their attention is the big question. Are they looking at the game? Are they looking at a particular part of the board? Are they looking at something in front of them, a hand of cards? Are they looking around the room, looking at their phone, looking out the window? Focus on your players. After the session, do a debrief. If it's a long session, like you play test in a couple of hours, then maybe have a midway break, get a drink, have a bio break, as people call it these days, nip to the loo, and debrief. Get everyone's immediate opinions. You want to get the first things on their mind as they come out of your game. Did they enjoy it? What things did they like particularly? What things would they change? What would you change is a great question to get past that initial barrier of them giving feedback. If you say, what did you think of it? They'll probably go, oh, it's all right, And if they're not confident to tell you they didn't like something, they probably won't. If you say to them, what one thing would you change very specifically? That makes them think, oh, actually, I think this particular thing could be this instead. And then you can get them to open up after that. Here's a chance for you to ask questions based on your notes. So you've got all your notes you've written down, and here's a chance to go through them methodically one at a time, which is why it's better than having it in your head. And you can ask specific questions based on those things. You will have a lot of stuff that kind of comes up. There'll be kind of a half-formed thought, right? There'll be a thing where a player has said something, and it was like, I think that thing sucks. Here's your chance to kind of drill down and think and ask why they think that. As I said before, especially if you disagree, be open and responsive and thank them. And even during a closed test, you can debrief yourself, run through these processes with yourself, go through your notes and ask yourself why you thought those things, or, dig down. In fact, here's a little thing on refining feedback. Players will often give you judgments rather than observations. And during a closed test, you'll do the same thing. It is much easier on the spur of the moment to kind of come out with, oh, I think that thing sucks. That thing is underpowered. That thing's overpowered. That's useless. I'd never use that. There's an observation buried in there somewhere, but you have to dig for it sometimes. So judgment being a thing which is based on opinion, and observation being a thing that's based on a fact. you can ask questions to get to the point of this. Why is a great starting question. So if someone says to you, the blue planet feels underpowered, why is that? I had it all game, didn't have enough resources. Could you explain a bit more? Why not enough resources for what? Well, I didn't feel I could build the ships I wanted to. Everyone else had more resources, and so on and so on and so on. As you do this, you will get to the root of the issue, and over time, you will train your testers to think that through first. They will still do it a lot, and that's fine because judgments are the easiest thing to come to. But over time, they'll get better at coming back at you with refined feedback, or at least partially refined a lot of the time. After you've done this, after your session, and it depends on how soon after. Sometimes I like to give it a day and then come back with a fresh set of eyes. But sometimes it's really exciting. You want to do it right now. Review your notes. Group your observations by topic. Get a fresh sheet of paper and write it all out. You know, you've got these ones are all about the turn sequence. These ones are about the combat phase. These ones are about character creation, whatever it might be. Very importantly, identify successes, things that are working well. Make sure you note those down as well. Anything that people are really enjoying about your game, make a note of it. It's so easy to forget that stuff and to not do it and think, oh, it's great, I'll leave it. You want to remind yourself not to take it out. And if anything, to lean further into that kind of stuff. Then identify issues. Everything that isn't working like you'd like it to, every little problem that came up, look for those and look for root causes. By root causes, what I mean is issues which cause smaller issues. A lot of the time, you will notice a bunch of issues that are actually symptoms of a root cause. You might not have seen the root cause. The root cause might be that your game takes too long. You know, something really broad like that. Or there are too many different things going on in your game. The symptoms are players get confused, players get antsy, this thing seems to spiral out of control in the end game, etc., etc., etc. Dig down, ask those questions. Why is this happening? Get to the root cause. Don't knee-jerk. Don't just change the little issues. Find the thing that is causing them. So now you've got a big list of issues. How do you prioritize them? Here's a quick, easy way of doing it. I like to use a post-it note and a whiteboard, or post-it notes and a whiteboard. And I try to think of how much impact does an issue have, as in when it happens, how much does it affect the game, and how often does it happen in testing? And you won't always know this after one test. This is why it's important to iterate mindfully, play a few tests. This issue, you know, comes up once every 5 games. This one happens every turn. Get your issues, write them down, one per post-it note. Put the first one in the middle of your whiteboard. That's your midpoint. And then everyone after that, does it happen more or less? That's that way, more or less than that one. And does it have more or less impact on the game? And you will lay them all out and you will group them. Anything that's top right, that's your high priority stuff. Bottom left, low priority, that's stuff you haven't got to worry about right now. And the medium priorities off to the other sides. That gives you an itemized list of things to work through when it comes to actually iterating your game. So once you've got that, you can then create a list in priority order of issues. What will happen is, like, you'll have like a scattered load of stuff across your chart, and you kind of start up there gradually, you sort of meander down it. And there'll be some things which are like, well, they're roughly equal. Just put them in an order. Doesn't really matter. As long as the ones that are high priority are above the ones that are medium priority, and they're above the ones that are low priority. For each one of those, create an action. Yeah. So an action should aim to fix an issue. Now, if you've summed up lots of your issues and identified a root cause, maybe the action is to change that root cause and it will take out all those issues. You might have a clear fix in mind. So there, increase the blue planet's production to 4. Dead straightforward, but still write it down. Don't just do it, write it down. It's also absolutely fine and valid to be more vague. Your action point could be look into ways to make the blue planet's production feel less underwhelming. And then that takes you back to your idea boards, maybe, that you created earlier on. It takes you back to that kind of closed testing. You test out all sorts of different things and then come back to it. You don't have to fix everything now. Say you've got a big old action plan with loads of different points on. Do the top 4 or 5, maybe? It depends on how big they are, because too many changes at once will make it really hard to tell whether each individual one has had an impact. If you make 4 changes and suddenly the game feels a lot better, you don't know which one of those it was, did it? If you make 4 changes and the game suddenly feels much worse, one of those was wrong. Which one was it? The fewer things you do, the better. But of course, there's also that kind of balancing act of you don't want to move at a glacial pace. What you'll find is generally as you get further down that process, you'll make fewer changes at once. As I said earlier on the graph I had, where is it? Yeah, the magnitude and frequency of your changes will drop as you progress through the game design process. And once you've done all that, you've got your action plan, you go back to the start of the process. So back to that slide we saw at the start. You've tested, you've observed, and now you've analyzed your observations, and you're going to go back and design some more stuff. And you're going to repeat. And you're going to keep on going, and your game will gradually get better and better and better. So yeah, that is the end of that section and the end of this week's seminar. We're 10 minutes over, 7 minutes over. Oh, but still, hopefully that's been useful. Do you have any questions on that stuff? If not, I'll move on to the exercise. Very dense one this week. Lots of stuff because playtesting is such a big topic. I mean, rules writing is also a really big topic, which we'll come on to the next 2 weeks. But it's because really, with that, we're kind of defining the difference between two very different types of rules writing. But yeah, playtesting is a big topic in itself. So there's a lot of stuff here. So thank you for bearing with me while I blitz through all of that. This week's exercise. Now there'll be no surprises here what the exercise is going to be, but let's break it down. The exercise is to do one closed test. 2 more if you want, but 1 is the exercise. Importantly, you can pick any game. Okay, you can pick a game. It could be your test build that you've made from last session. It could be something else. It could be a game you've been working on for a while. It could be a game someone else has worked on. It could be a published game that you like. Set an aim and a focus. If it's a published game, maybe change something. Maybe you really like, I don't know, Snakes and Ladders. But what you want to do is do a system where you roll 6 dice at the start and then you use those in an order of your choice. Or I don't know, whatever. Pick a thing and make it so that there's something that you know needs testing. I mean, to be fair, with most published games, just play it as it is and you'll find things that need testing. Set an aim and a focus and start playing. So decide what it is you're looking for, set that question, and stop once you achieve your aim. Play a big game if you want to. Crack out Twilight Imperium. Go for it. But as soon as you achieve your aim, whether that's after 10 minutes or after 2 hours, that's when you stop. Note your observations, as we talked about. Write them all down as you're going through, and afterwards debrief yourself. Ask yourself, those questions. Get your immediate opinions. How do you feel coming out of it straight away? Dig deeper on the questions that are in your notes. Be open and responsive to your own feedback, especially if you disagree. Then, once you've done that, identify your successes and issues and dig for root causes. Analyze your feedback, like we said, and prioritize your issues. If you want to create an action plan, awesome. The main thing is to do a test and come out of it with an ordered list of issues that need fixing. That's the crux of the exercise. Okay, so if it's a game you're working on, that will give you an action plan that you can then move on to make your next test. And what you'll find if you do this, if you get good at this, your playtesting will be so much more useful. And you will find that you can get more information out of 1 session than you've been getting out of 5. There's no guarantee of that. I've pulled those numbers out of nowhere. But yeah, there we go. That's an exercise. If you want to do it, do it. If you don't, that's fine. If you do, though, do let us know on the Discord channel. I'd love to see some action points, some prioritized lists. So there we go. That's the end of that session. As ever, thank you. I've needed to change that. I've already emailed you these slides, and I'm going to send you some more useful things as well. I've got some various lists of places you can find playtesters, as well as a couple of playtesting forms that you can use if that's the kind of thing that floats your boat. As ever, if you're enjoying this, do let people know. We're halfway through the course. This is the end of session 3. So 3 more of these. I'm enjoying myself. I hope you are too. I'm going to stop recording now.